I would like for us to consider some great examples of humility in the characters we find in the New Testament this week, by their demeanor, by their actions. Good morning. This is Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisseton, Illinois, with your thoughts for Monday. We see many followers of Jesus who were just a part of the crowds. They were wanting to see the miracles. Maybe they wanted to hear his teachings, but they were not totally devoted to him. There are many in these crowds who were skeptical and ready to leave at any time. But there was a young woman named Mary. She lived in Bethany with her brother Lazarus, her sister Martha. She had spent some time with Jesus and worshiped him like no other. The first picture we witness of her humility is when she is sitting at the feet of Jesus to hear his teachings like a devoted student and follower. We actually read of this instance from her sister, who has complained because Martha was left to do all the serving of the guests in their home while Mary just sat there. And Jesus said to her, "Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her," showing that her humility to her master was so important. She was also ready to learn and hear his words, which would be helpful later on when Jesus would leave them. And now we see her after Lazarus has died, when Jesus arrives on the scene, and she exclaims, "Jesus, we know that if you had been here, our brother would not have died." That is such a declaration of faith that it's astounding while her family is facing such grief in this terrible loss. But probably the greatest showing of her humility is when she anointed Jesus. Mark 14 tells us that they were in the home of Simon the leper. So obviously Jesus had healed this man of his leprosy, or they would not be there in the first place. And Mary enters the room carrying a very costly alabaster box of ointment. John chapter 12 and verse 3 says, "She brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil and stood at his feet behind him weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair, the hair of her head. And she kissed his feet and she anointed him with the fragrant oil." You see, she is not caring about what others think. She doesn't care about the cost of this nard that she has poured freely over him. All she cares about is honoring Christ. Now that is purely humility and self-effacing, to consider God and Christ above all else. The Bible tells us that the men in this room would scoff at the waste of such costly ointment. But Jesus said, "You didn't even wash my feet whenever I arrived here, nor did you anoint my head as a guest after some travel." Jesus also said, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Now that is a memorable act of humility by this young woman. It will not go unnoticed. So my question is, have we offered anything to God in humility lately that will be remembered by others?